The rain had stopped barely an hour ago, and the pavement of Brooklyn Heights still gleamed with that melancholic grey that seemed to embrace Maria Sullivan's life. The clock showed 11 in the morning, but the sky remained covered by a layer of clouds that diffused the light, as if even the sun hesitated to come out that day. Maria walked slowly down Court Street with her closed umbrella in one hand and a small bouquet of wildflowers in the other. She had picked them minutes earlier in Brooklyn Bridge Park like every Sunday. Daisies, some sprigs of lavender, and 3 black-eyed Susans she had found growing near a rusty fence. The flowers weren't pretty in the traditional sense. They were a bit wilted, a bit sad, like her. She crossed the entrance to Greenwood Cemetery without greeting the guard, who already knew her face, her slow pace, her sacred routine. She walked to the back, toward a white headstone without ornaments, with an inscription engraved in clean but cold letters. Jacob and Michael Sullivan, 2009, 2020. She knelt carefully, letting the hem of her coat touch the damp earth. She placed the flowers at the base of the headstone and arranged them with trembling fingers. "Good morning, my boys," she whispered. She didn't cry, not anymore. Her tears had dried up long ago. All that remained was that dense, silent sadness that lodged in her chest like an eternal knot. 3 years had passed since the accident, since her ex-husband, Rick, called her one afternoon to tell her the boys wouldn't be coming back, that the car went off the road, that the burial would be with closed caskets, that it wasn't good to see them like that. And she never saw them. Never. Just a funeral without answers, a grave without goodbyes. She stayed like that in silence for a long while, until something pulled her from her trance. "Ma'am," said a child's voice behind her. Maria turned slowly. A boy about 8 years old was watching her from a respectful distance. He wore dark pants, a worn hoodie, and disheveled hair as if the wind had played with it. His cheeks were covered with freckles, and his eyes, there was something in them. A silent sadness, similar to hers. In his hands he carried a small bunch of wildflowers like hers. "Yes?" Maria asked, a bit confused. The boy walked forward a few steps and extended the bouquet toward her. "These kids," he said, pointing to the headstone, "the ones in the photo, they live in my building." Maria frowned. She stood up clumsily, feeling her stomach tighten. "What are you saying?" The boy handed her the bouquet. As she received it, something fell between the stems. 2 Polaroid photos. Maria felt her heart stop for a second. Her hands began to tremble as she lifted the photos. In the first one, 2 boys were sitting in a room with unpainted concrete walls. One of them had messy hair and big eyes. The other wore a grey sweater too big for his body. Both were dirty, with empty expressions, but what froze her blood wasn't the scene, it was the faces. They were identical to Jacob and Michael, exactly as she remembered them. "No, it can't be," she stammered. She turned the photos over. On the back, written in childish handwriting, was an address, Manhattan Avenue 102, Apartment 1C. Maria looked up, but the boy was already walking away. He walked down the same path she had arrived on. Before crossing the gate, he turned to her once more and said, "They look sad. They asked me for help, but I'm just a kid." And he disappeared. That night, Maria didn't turn on the television, didn't eat dinner, didn't grade papers. She sat at the kitchen table with the 2 Polaroids in front of her, as if they were pieces of a cursed puzzle. The clock struck 2 in the morning when she finally stood up. She hadn't decided anything. She simply couldn't keep waiting. On Monday, she asked for the day off at school. Nobody asked why. She left early, walked to the address written down. Her heart was beating like a drum when she arrived in front of the grey 3-story building with an aged facade and rusted mailboxes. Manhattan Avenue 102. She looked at the entrance. The metal gate was poorly closed. She pushed it quietly and went up the stairs. The air smelled of dampness, of confinement. First floor, Apartment 1C. The number was hand-painted on the wooden door. Maria stood still. She didn't know what she expected, but then something happened. The door opened. From inside, a male voice came out. A voice she knew. "Don't forget your backpacks." And then she saw them. They came out of the apartment one after the other. One boy in a blue sweater, the other with a black backpack. Heads down, thin, but without a doubt. Jacob and Michael. And behind them, Rick. Maria couldn't breathe. She had to hold onto the wall. She wanted to scream, run to them, hug them, but her body didn't respond. Rick took them by the shoulder and guided them downstairs. He didn't see her. Neither did the boys. Maria remained motionless, trembling, the bouquet of flowers fallen at her feet, the Polaroids in her pocket burning her skin as if they were live coals. They weren't dead. The pain she had thought she'd learned to carry was now something else. A deep rage, an infinite betrayal, a maternal instinct that awakened with force. Her world wasn't crumbling. It had just been resurrected. For days, Maria walked as if in a trance. She saw the world from afar, as if her body inhabited a stage where she was only a spectator. She taught in her classroom with the same serene voice as always, responded to her neighbors' good mornings, but inside her, something pulsed with force. Her children were alive, and Rick had them. That thought was a thorn that dug deeper every time she breathed. But knowing wasn't enough. Nobody else knew. Nobody else would believe it. And above all, she had no proof. Wednesday morning she went again to Greenwood Cemetery, the same path as always, but now loaded with contained fury. Upon arriving, she looked for the caretaker, an older man who was always sweeping dry leaves or watering plants. She found him smoking a cigarette next to the tool shed. "Good morning," she greeted him with a dry tone. "Good morning, ma'am," he responded, recognizing her. Maria approached slowly and showed him something she carried hidden in her pocket. A $50 bill. The man blinked, surprised. "I need to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth," she said. The man swallowed. "Depends on the question, ma'am. 3 years ago, my children were buried here, Jacob and Michael Sullivan. Were you here that day?" The man hesitated a moment, but Maria's gaze was relentless. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, I was here." "Was the casket opened?" Silence, long, disturbing. "No, ma'am. It wasn't opened. The father said they were in bad shape, that it was better that way." "Did you see them?" "No." "Who saw them?" "Nobody. Extra was paid." Not to ask questions. Maria closed her eyes tightly. A vertigo ran through her from stomach to throat. Her legs were trembling, but she didn't allow herself to fall. Not there. "Thank you," she murmured, leaving the bill on the rusty table. The man didn't stop her when she left. That night, Maria went up to the building's rooftop. She needed to breathe different air. It wasn't by chance that she ran into Cecilia Ramirez there, a neighbor with whom she had barely exchanged greetings in the past. Cecilia was sitting with a glass of red wine, looking at the illuminated city from above. She wore reading glasses hanging from her neck and a folder on her lap. "Am I bothering you?" Maria asked, uncertain. "Not at all. Want to sit down?" She sat beside her. A comfortable silence enveloped them for several minutes, until Maria spoke. She didn't tell everything, but enough for Cecilia to listen without blinking. The photos, the boy from the cemetery, the address, and above all that she had seen her children alive. "I'm a lawyer, Maria," Cecilia finally said, with a firm tone. "And if all that is true, what your ex-husband did is called kidnapping, and it's punishable by many years in prison." "But I don't have proof," she responded. "Only old photos and my word." Cecilia looked at her a moment, then said, "Let me help you." The next morning, Cecilia knocked on the door of apartment 4A. There lived Alex Martinez, a withdrawn young man, fond of video games, who worked as a data analyst. He had helped several neighbors with their computers before and had a reputation for being discreet. "Rick Sullivan?" Alex repeated, checking on his laptop. "There are no current records under that name, but if you give me something more, a photo and address, I can search." Cecilia handed him an old photo. Alex typed for a few minutes and suddenly his expression changed. "There's something weird here. This guy appears registered 2 years ago as Robert Miller, with an address on the same Manhattan Avenue, but in another unit. Documentation created from a remote module without biometric verification. That is, a fake identity." "And what's he doing now?" Maria asked. He works at a distribution warehouse in Queens. Night shift, under the radar. Maria gritted her teeth. She felt the impulse to go look for him right then, but Cecilia stopped her. We can't do anything yet. If you confront him, he could disappear again. We need solid proof. And how do you get that proof? She asked desperately. Then someone knocked on the door. It was the boy. Tommy. Can I come in? He asked, with a low voice. He had in his hand a notebook with drawings of what appeared to be two caged children. I live in their building, he said as he sat on the floor. Sometimes I hear screaming. The man yells at them a lot. He tells them their mom didn't want them, that she abandoned them for another man. Maria felt her stomach twist. Have you seen them up close? Do you talk to them? Yeah, in the back courtyard sometimes, but only for a few seconds. They told me their mom's name was Maria, like you, and that they dreamed of seeing her. Alex, who had been listening in silence, looked at Cecilia. I think I can put in cameras, microphones, we just have to be careful. Tommy looked up. I can help. My room faces their kitchen. From my window you can see everything. Maria looked at him with tears in her eyes. Why are you doing this, Tommy? The boy shrugged. Because they're sad. And you are too. I don't like seeing sad people. Over the following days, a silent operation was put in motion. Alex installed a hidden microphone with a drone that flew to Rick's apartment window. With Tommy's help, they managed to pass a recorder in a toy. Maria, for her part, managed to recover from Jacob's old room a comb with hair, a DNA sample. Each step was a risk, but also a hope. The night they placed the last device, Cecilia handed Maria a folder. If this works, if we record something useful, if the DNA matches, if the fake documents are accepted by the judge, we can act legally, and if not, then we'll fight harder. Maria looked at the folder with trembling hands. She didn't have everything yet, but for the first time in years, she felt the truth approaching, and with it, the possibility of recovering what should never have been lost. The nights had become longer since Maria learned the truth. Hope, though powerful, was also an open wound. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream about graves or silence. She dreamed of interrupted hugs, of voices that didn't remember her name, and with the lifeless eyes of her children. It's going to hurt, Cecilia had told her one night, but it's worth every second if in the end you have them back. Maria didn't respond. She just nodded with her gaze fixed on the folder of evidence on the table. The plan was simple, on paper. But in practice, each step was a tightrope. First, they needed something more solid for the DNA test. The hair sample taken from Jacob's old comb was good, but now they wanted a direct one. A brush, a glass, a t-shirt. Tommy, always discreet, found the opportunity one afternoon when Jacob forgot his sweater in the service patio. He left it on the line, said the boy as he handed it over. I was scared, but nobody saw me. Maria took the sweater in her hands as if it were pure gold. She hugged it. It still smelled of cheap soap and that soft scent of childhood. Second, Alex gained access to the Vital Records database. There he found the documents with which Rick had created his new identity, Robert Miller, forged from an internet cafe that had closed months later. Everything fit. With this, we already have proof of fraud and identity theft, said Alex, but we need more. Third, the key piece arrived unexpectedly. Cecilia, dressed in casual clothes, presented herself as a financial services advisor and managed to enter the building where Rick worked. She feigned interest in a service and convinced him to have a chat in the break room. Hidden among the papers she carried was a microphone. During the conversation, Rick spoke of his difficult past, of an unstable ex-wife, of how he had to do what was necessary to protect his children. Nobody understood it, he said in a pitiful voice. But I did. I closed the casket and buried it all. My old life doesn't exist anymore. That phrase was enough, but nerves were at their limit. Maria didn't sleep, barely ate. Anxiety got into her bones. She began to feel that Rick knew, and she wasn't wrong. One night, as she was returning from Cecilia's house, she found him in the dark hallway of the building, leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. Maria, he said with a calm voice, She stopped dead. Her heart raced. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." "I live here. I've always lived here. You shouldn't be here." Rick took a step toward her, not aggressive, but enough for her to feel the air change. "You know, you always had that look, that one that says you're sure you're right, as if the world were black or white. But there are things you don't understand, Maria, things I did out of love." She confronted him, without stepping back. "Don't talk about love. You don't know what it is," he smiled, "and you don't know what you're digging up." Then he left. Maria was left alone in the hallway, trembling, but not from fear, from rage. The next day, Cecilia and Alex gathered all the evidence in a sealed folder. DNA confirmed. Fake documents, recordings, testimonies. They presented them before a family court judge who, after an expedited review, issued an immediate temporary custody order. The police acted discreetly. There were no sirens or shouts. Just 3 unmarked patrol cars that arrived one morning while Rick was sleeping after his night shift. "We have an arrest warrant for aggravated kidnapping, fraud, and identity falsification," said the officer as they handcuffed him. Rick said nothing. He didn't resist. He just looked toward the interior of the apartment with an expression Maria would never forget. Hatred mixed with defeat. The children were removed from the home by Child Protective Services. They carried old backpacks and confused looks. Nobody fully explained to them what was happening, only that they would go to a safe place for a while. Maria was waiting for them in Cecilia's car. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought they would hear it from a distance. When she saw them, she felt her soul split in two. It was them, her children, her boys. But they looked at her, without recognizing her. "Who's that lady?" asked Michael, hiding behind a social worker. "She's your mother," the woman responded with a sweet voice. Jacob frowned. "Our mom is dead." Maria stepped back. It was as if they had emptied her chest. She wanted to speak, hug them, shout at them that she was alive, that she was always there. But Cecilia took her by the arm. "It's not the time," she whispered. Maria just nodded, swallowing her tears. The children were taken to a child protection center while definitive custody was resolved. There was no more danger, but now began the real battle, to recover not only her children, but the connection lost for years of lies. That night, Maria stayed alone in her apartment. She had the legal victory in her hand, but in her chest, she still felt the cold of the hallway, Michael's words, the emptiness of those eyes that no longer recognized her. Tommy came to see her before going to sleep. "Are the kids okay?" "Yes," she responded with effort. "They're safe." Tommy gave her a drawing. It was a big yellow flower, with 2 happy little faces in the center. "This is for when you're together again." Maria hugged him without saying a word, and she knew in that moment that the hardest part remained, making memory bloom again. The walls of the Brooklyn Child Protection Center were colorful, with murals painted by volunteers and drawings from other children who, like Jacob and Michael, had passed through there. But for Maria, each visit was a minefield. She knew she couldn't rush time. She couldn't force love to remember. "Hi, I'm Maria," she said each time, as if it were the first. She brought with her a different bag each visit, photos, letters, old toys, stories she read to them when they were little. Sometimes a song on her cell phone, or a stuffed teddy bear with a chewed ear, Michael's favorite when he was 3 years old. The children watched her with distance. They were silent. Sometimes Michael played with a pencil, sometimes Jacob drew something in his notebook without looking at her. But she didn't give up. On one of those afternoons, she took out a wooden box she had always kept in her closet. She opened it in front of them and let them see its contents. "Do you remember this?" Inside was a collection of small shells, painted stones, and a ticket to the Children's Museum of Manhattan, all wrapped in the smell of lavender. Jacob frowned. "Is that mine?" Maria nodded with a faint smile. "You painted it. You said it looked like a spaceship. You glued it with Elmer's on cardboard and wrote, 'Jacob Sullivan, Space Engineer.'" Michael, curious, took a little red stone and turned it in his hands. "I had one just like this." You said it was magic, that if you put it under your pillow, there would be no nightmares, she responded, without letting go of her voice. The children said no more, but that night, Maria received the first sign. A social worker told her that Jacob asked if he could take the red stone to his room, and Michael wanted them to read him a story, the same one she brought that day. Recovery wasn't linear. There were setbacks, painful silences, days when Jacob didn't want to see her and Michael locked himself in his world. But each memory, each smell, each shared story was a new seed. One afternoon, while Maria was softly singing a lullaby, Michael approached and rested his head on her arm. "That one, you sang that when I had a fever, right?" She looked at him, holding back tears. "Yes, my love, always." And the next day, it was Jacob who held her hand during the entire visit. The trial was resolved faster than expected. Rick Sullivan was sentenced to 12 years in prison for aggravated kidnapping, documentary fraud, and identity falsification. He showed no remorse. His defense tried to argue emotional imbalance, but the evidence was irrefutable. Maria obtained full and definitive custody of her children. The news spread through the media. Headlines said things like, "The case of the mother who unearthed the truth, flowers for the living, deadly deception in NYC." Journalists knocked on her door. Producers offered interviews, documentaries, exclusives. She said no to everyone. She just wanted her home. A month after the verdict, spring came to the city. The heat was mild. The cherry blossom trees tinged the streets with pink, and the markets filled with flowers. Maria took her children by the hand and brought them to Greenwood Cemetery. Not to cry, not to visit an empty grave. They were going to close the circle. With the help of 2 workers, they removed the white headstone, the one that said her children's names as if they had died, as if they had ever lain beneath that earth. In its place, they left new soil, loose, free, and Maria planted there daisies and black-eyed Susans, the same flowers she had brought for years with tears, and that now she brought with gratitude. Jacob observed in silence. Michael smelled one of the flowers with curiosity. "Why flowers, Mom?" he asked, touching a daisy. She crouched down next to him, her arms stained with dirt. "Because it was the flowers that brought me back to you." The 3 embraced. There were no words, just an old, familiar warmth, returning home. A few days later, in the new apartment in Park Slope, the furniture still smelled of freshly unpacked wood. The walls were full of drawings and toys were scattered across the floor, as if they had always been there. Tommy arrived one afternoon with a backpack full of papers. "I brought you new stories," he announced with his always enthusiastic voice. Maria hugged him. "You're not bringing flowers anymore, huh?" He smiled. "The flowers already fulfilled their mission. Now I bring adventures." Jacob invited him to his room. Michael pulled him toward the television, and for the first time in years the home sounded of laughter, of footsteps, of life. Maria stayed at the door, watching the scene. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning.